Good morning everybody and welcome to this Chambers Wales webinar on creating a more diverse workforce. It's really great to have so many people joining us today, and thanks for your time. I hope you'll find the next hour a really interesting and stimulating session, and we've got a great panel who you'll be introduced to shortly. Just a couple of things from me. So my name is Cerys Furlong. I'm the Chief Executive of Chwarae Teg, which I'll say a little bit about in a moment. I'll be chairing the session with the panel whose names that you can see on the slides now and who are going to introduce themselves more fully in a moment. Just a couple of housekeeping things from us. If you could use the question and answer Q&A function for any questions that you want to submit, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. And the chat function of the webinar can be used to share any contact details or useful links, but not for questions, if that's okay. So I'm going to just say a few words to start with, if we can move on to the next slide. And before I do, just to say that as ever, when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we want this to be a really inclusive space where everybody feels very welcome. So we'll not tolerate any exclusionary behaviour. And I'm sure that everybody will treat each other with respect, and we'll have a fantastic session. So if we move on to the next slide, as I said, that's me, so you can keep in touch with me. Chwarae Teg, just very briefly, we're a charity that's been around for 30 years, campaigning for and working with businesses around gender equality. And these are our kind of 3 strategic priorities where we feel that we can make most of an impact. So women in the economy, ensuring that women can have access to all the benefits that the labour market and working gives them, women represented so that wherever power and influence is held, that women have a fair seat at that table, and women at risk, so where all women are empowered to achieve their potential regardless of their background, social status or location. So that's just a little bit about us as context. And if we quickly move on to the next slide, I just wanted to say very briefly, I guess, to set the scene, we publish on an annual basis every January a State of the Nations report, which focuses on gender but does include some intersectional data. And when I get a chance, I'll put perhaps a link to this in the chat as well. The report from 2021 showed that in Wales we still have a gender pay gap of over 11%. That means that on an hourly basis, women are earning £11.74 and men are earning £13.28. There's also a real difference between what men and women say about the reasons for their economic activity or inactivity. So, for example, 26% of women state that they're economically inactive because they're looking after the home and family, compared to only 6% of men. So a real disparity there. And we know that the majority of part-time workers are women, so 40% of women compared to 11% of men. And these factors are even more kind of enhanced for single parents. So 86% of single parents are women, and those households are most likely in Wales to be living in poverty. And there are clearly intersectional factors as well, which the report explores, and I'm sure we'll come on to discuss later today. So if we move quickly on to the next slide, I just wanted to touch briefly on COVID, because obviously it's something that I'm sure will come up and be foremost in our minds this year. And as you can see from the report that we published last September, the groups that have been hardest hit include women, people of colour, those on low income, and it shows that that's for a variety of reasons, partly due to women's status as key workers, more likely to be working in sectors like retail, hospitality, where they've been particularly affected by lockdown. So it's going to be a really interesting time when we think about diversity in the workforce, how we recover. Will our economy look the same as it did pre-COVID, after COVID, and which groups are going to benefit or be adversely affected by those changes? So if we just skip on very quickly to the next slide, just to say that and never miss an opportunity to plug some of the work that we do. And we certainly do a huge amount of work supporting employers across the public, private and voluntary sector to embed thinking about gender equality and equality, diversity and inclusion into they're good business practices. And the reason is because the evidence is very strong to show the benefits that can bring, and particularly, I can see there's a typo on the slide, which is really irritating, but particularly around economic growth. We did some research in Wales a couple of years ago that just showed that if we could close the gender gaps in Wales, we could add 13.6 billion to the Welsh economy, which is not much short of the whole spending power of Welsh government, and would significantly add to our economy. And also we know that people's behaviours are changing. So women are much more likely to look at an employer's approach to diversity and inclusion when thinking about whether they want to apply for a job in that workplace. So and I think that's behaviour that we're also seeing among younger groups entering the workforce for the first time. So there's a clear business benefit. And just moving on to the last slide from me before we go to the panel, who you're here to hear from. If any of that is something that we can support you with, then we offer a range of services, some free, some paid for. And please do get in touch if there's anything that we can support you with in terms of addressing gender inequality in the workplace. But without further ado, I think we'll move on to the panel discussion, and I'm going to ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves rather than me introduce them as I ask them the first questions. And we're kicking off with a couple of questions, but we'll, as I said, also be monitoring the Q&A on a live basis so that we can see what you guys want to put to panelists. And I'm going to come to Caroline first and ask, once you've introduced yourself, to tell us a little bit about how businesses can ensure that their diversity and inclusion policy isn't just a tick box exercise.
Awesome. Thank you for just introducing me to the panel. Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline Gundu. I am a senior business consultant at CGI. I work particularly on business transformation, so helping business to change. I'm also chair of the CGI Women's Network, and I sit on our D&I committee representing the network. We have over 200 members that are involved with that network, and we seek to promote gender diversity within CGI and assist women to have a fulfilling career within CGI. I also represent another diverse group, which is young people in the energy sector. So I'm chair of the Young Energy Professionals Forum, which is a forum for industry professionals with over 1,000 members representing 300 different countries. And we seek to promote the next generation of energy industry professionals and providing them with opportunities to collaborate, develop, and to recognize their successes. So just a brief introduction to who I am. In terms of the question then, how can we ensure that diversity and inclusion policy is not just a tick box exercise? I mean, the first thing is to acknowledge that diversity isn't a tick box exercise, and is actually a conscious and intentional approach to diversify your workforce, to make them feel included and valued. And, you know, when people feel included and valued, they thrive more, they feel valued, and your business can easily reap the benefits. And I think the first thing to really sort of ask yourself as a business owner or as a business leader is, why do you need diversity and inclusion in your workplace to start with? I think there's this belief that because everyone's talking about it, everyone's doing it, therefore you need to ask yourself, as a business, why do we need to sort of have this as a consideration? And what does diversity and inclusion look for us in our line of work and the type of people we interact with? At CGI, we part of our approach to diversity is we want to look like our clients. So a lot of our teams are made up of people from various communities that we serve and various businesses that we interact with, because it's a demonstration of who we interact with. To sustain this this diversity and inclusion approach, what we've sort of seen as a business is it needn't be coming from leadership only, but it's leadership and the people that work within the teams at a grassroots level. So it's about empowering. So like I mentioned, I chair the women's network within the organization, and how that came about was we were empowered by senior leaders to sort of make the networks what we want them to be, talk about things that matter to us, creating a safe space for women within that space. And it's enabled us to bring up really interesting initiatives. I mean, one I'm particularly proud of is is we've now introduced the availability of free sanitary products in all our offices for anyone that visits. And these products are also environmentally friendly because we also want to take into consideration the discussions around, you know, climate action and net zero. And again, that's just an example of what happens when businesses empower people at a grassroots level and also give them that approval from leadership to be able to do what they do. I guess that probably answers your question.
That's brilliant. What a great way to kick us off. Thanks, Caroline. I'm sure some of those things we'll come back to as the morning goes on. But I wanted to come to Adam next. And Adam, again, could you introduce yourself, but also answer the question, how have you addressed challenges within your business around the language people use and ensuring that it's inclusive? And this is a particularly hot topic currently.
Thanks, Cerys. Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Keane. I'm the Managing Director of Adventure Travel, which is a bus and coach operator in South Wales. And some of you will probably know us better as NAT Group, which was our trading name until perhaps 2 or 3 months ago when we rebranded. So we've obviously got a fairly unique situation in that we've got an awful lot of frontline employees, bus drivers, cleaners, engineers, fuelers. Then we've got a tier of admin staff and managers and supervisors who are office-based. And then we've got a much smaller team of senior leaders and directors who sort of strategize and run the business. So really pertinent question about how you address the challenges and how you choose what words to use and what language to use. Because if I'm honest, you have to shape it depending very much on who you're speaking to. So if you're trying to encourage 250 bus drivers to change the terminology they've used and change how they speak to their colleagues about minority groups and different communities, that's a very, very different gig to deciding how you're going to strategize and think about changing inclusion going forward as a business culture. So if I think about frontline workers, first of all, something we hear a lot is, I'm very old-fashioned, and you know, it's okay to have certain views because I'm old-fashioned and I have old values. Well, in some respects, that's okay, but not in all respects. And we've done an awful lot of work to try and change that. So our approach has been very much, rather than constantly bombarding people with, you must say this, you mustn't use that, you must use that. We've been dropping into conversation in much wider comms, just snippets of information which hopefully resonate with people and lead people to think about how they can change their language and how they can be more inclusive. And I think something else which is absolutely key is you have to have managers employed who want to change things. You have to have people included who want to actually change culture and change language. We include it as a key interview strategy when we employ senior leaders. And we asked them about how they would change company culture and how they would include different groups and different people and how they would generate inclusion. And I think for the first time ever now, we probably have employee reps from individual groups of communities and backgrounds. And we found that very, very valuable. We have, for example, a driver who started with us a few weeks ago who's been with us previously and left and has come back because he's heard that we're doing more to include you know, drivers from outside of groups that we've had in the past. So I think the more we can do with that's important. And if I only get you to take away one key piece of information from the challenge about the language you use, do not accept people saying I'm old-fashioned and therefore I have this view that it's okay to say something which is deeply offensive or entirely inappropriate. It's okay to challenge that, and it's okay to look people in the eye and say, do you know what? That was okay 10 years ago. It wasn't okay, but it was accepted 10 years ago. It no longer is. You've got to challenge those views and try and bring people on a bit.
That's great. Thanks, Adam. And I guess leading on to that is the question to Khushbu about everything that Caroline and Adam have already talked about, the kind of practices that they're embedding in their workplaces. How can diversity and inclusion benefit a business, and what's your experience of that?
Thanks, Cerys. So good morning, everyone. It's really lovely to be here this morning, a topic that's really close to my heart. I'm a local director for Metro Bank in Wales. Alongside this role, I'm also leading diversity and inclusion for our region internally, also governor for Cardiff and Vale College. Coming back to your question, Cerys, for me, inclusion promotes belonging, purpose and well-being. And then diversity ignites that problem solving, creativity and innovation. And generally, these are things that businesses want for both their people and their work. And there's plenty of studies and statistics that prove diversity positively impacts a company. Diverse teams perform better. Diversity brings in X% more sales. Diversity supports innovation and productivity, and the list goes on and on. And it sounds like a dream shopping list for most businesses. But on the other hand, we've got really alarming statistics like transgender unemployment or unfair treatment for those with disabilities, parental discrimination, the lack of women and/or people of colour on boards. And it just begs the question that as a business, why would you want to throw away the opportunity to increase performance, productivity and innovation? You know, why wouldn't you want a better performing team? So for me, diversity and inclusion isn't just about helping a business as an ancillary on the side. We talked about it not being a tick box exercise, and it's becoming more and more evident that not focusing on diversity and inclusion is just a poor business decision. And you know, for any other poor business decision, you'd really come down hard on it. When you have a diverse workforce, you've got representation. And then when you bring in the inclusivity of the representation, you're making each representation feel respected, valued, and integrated. And you're making these people feel welcome for who they are. Being inclusive just means that people feel like they're in the mainstream. They've got access to the opportunities, their ideas are being solicited. And there's a fantastic analogy actually by Verna Myers, and she does amazing work around diversity and inclusion. It really brings this to life. She says, diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusivity is being asked to dance. And I really love that because it's so simple. And it talks about creating this diverse workforce, but taking it a step further into inclusivity as well. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants to be respected and valued for who they are. And when you do this, people are celebrated for their strengths, and you get people who are capable of showing their very best. You know, we've talked about just generally mental well-being and mental health and bringing our best selves to work. Well, it's so important that diversity and inclusion can really, really promote this. Just circling back to a couple of things that both Caroline and Adam said around leadership and not just being leaders, and Adam mentioned not the importance of the managers. And I think leaders in particular have the opportunity to create this diverse workforce and then an inclusive environment within it, because they've got the influence to lead this. So for leaders out there that are really looking for how do I create this diverse workforce, you don't have to have all the answers. Seek the answers rather than assume. Be committed rather than saying it's not your problem. Challenge your biases rather than thinking you know it all, and be curious rather than worried about being right. Because as a leader, you have the responsibility to lead these changes.
Thanks, Kushbi. That's really kind of passionate and wide-ranging kind of explanation of all the benefits of diversity to business. And I guess what I'm going to come to Keela to talk a bit about is how we do some of that. So I know, Keela, something that you're really passionate about is creating a culture of allyship in the organisation. And perhaps you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about that.
Sure, absolutely. Hello, everyone. So I'm Keela, pronouns she, her. I'm the inclusion lead in the Food Standards Agency. I've never worked anywhere other than government. I'm government through and through. And a little bit of confession time, I would say, to start with. My thoughts on allyship have drastically changed over the years. I've headed up networks for a really, really long time. We always welcomed allies right from day one. We didn't ever tell them what we wanted of them. We didn't give them any tools to actually help them on their allyship, but we knew we wanted them. I've seen networks as well who don't welcome allies and actually just focus on the marginalised group. My mind changed in 2009, and it was when I read the Catalyst research on engaging men in gender equality. In the research, it talks about how gender initiatives come across to men, and it comes across, you want my job. Men also have a really strong sense of fair play. There are things that undermine men's support to gender equality: apathy, fear, ignorance of gender issues. And that was the day when I read that report that I changed my approach to allyship. And I was heading up the LGBT network, and I was like, right, we're going to have more LGBT allies than we're going to have LGBT people in the network, because allies are the majority in an organization, and actually allies really dictate your workplace culture. In the Women's Network, we started Friends of the Women's Network. That was their title. The men in the Women's Network decided they wanted to be called Friends, and they did their own 5 ways to support women in the workplace. And this was sent out to everybody who ever joined, women and men. And so the 5 ways to support women in the workplace: listen, give space to women, mention, occupy the conversation by default, promote flexibility for all, and I mean to support men and women to work flexibly, challenge negative behavior such as sexist language, casual put downs, banter, act as a role model, whatever your grade, gender or circumstances, and get some perspective. So no one's got a monopoly on the human experience. The vast majority of us are limited by the world that we live in. And so those were the 5 ways to support women in the workplace. More recently, I've been developing an allyship program. For too long, our focus has always been about marginalized groups and fixing. Actually, I want to look at culture and I want to look at behaviors, and we do this through allies. So I've been a civil service LGBT allies trainer for over a year. Every month we talk about LGBT rights, we talk about terminology, what to say, what not to say, scenarios. I also co-authored the Race Allies training as well with a colleague from our Race and Ethnicity Network. And it came about through conversations last year. It came about because I could see her. And I needed to understand where she was coming from. So it literally just came about from our conversations. And we authored the Race Allies training. It goes through definitions, it goes through race rights, it goes into gaps in our knowledge of history as well, of race history. We talk about what not to say. We talk about anonymized lived experiences, microaggressions. We talk about the difference between allyship and saviorism as well. We choreograph the Race Allies training between the 2 of us because I read out the anonymized lived experiences. And actually, as a white person reading out those experiences, people then need to reflect on why it's so shocking. A white person's actually reading these out. So it's been incredibly powerful, and we delivered it to over 2,000 people within just a few months. So what's next? I'm actually now working on disability allies because I want to build an entire program. So allyship is about community. It's about community of those people who don't have that lived experience, but most importantly, you're open to and willing to learn. So what I would urge everyone on the call today is think about your allies and just give them the tools to support and help and champion. Thank you.
Thanks, Keela. That's fantastic. And sorry to put you on the spot, but because it's such a good practical example, can you just give us some sense of what impact it's had?
Yeah, we actually did an evaluation because 6 months after, certainly the Race Allies training. And I didn't want an evaluation based on, oh, the speaker was good, or I quite liked the training. I wanted an evaluation on action. So what actions have you done? Because allies are active. Allies aren't passive, allies are active. So in the evaluation, one person sticks in my mind, and that was one person who said, I've never thought of Black, Asian, minority ethnic people as people's experiences in my church. And she said, so I went back to my church and I asked the question. Now we've got a group formed to talk about inclusion on the intersection of race and ethnicity and faith. And I was like, wow, that one training that was only an hour on allyship just prompted her to go and question inclusion in her everyday life. So we have, so we've done our evaluation, but that's something that really sticks in my head. And my evaluation is on action. It's not on, oh, they enjoyed the training, is what they've done afterwards. So yeah, that's an example.
That's a great example, thank you. We've had some pre-submitted questions from attendees, some of which I'm going to put to the panel now. But don't forget, you can put further questions in the Q&A function as we're speaking, and if you want us to probe a point further, then we'll keep an eye on that as well. So the first question, I'm going to come to Caroline on this. This is from Louise David at Llamai, and she says, with 1 in 3 women experiencing domestic abuse in their lifetime, how do all the organisations involved ensure they celebrate an environment where all staff feel empowered to discuss domestic abuse?
Thank you for the question. It's a shocking statistic when you really think about it. 1 in 3 women experience this, and I think the pandemic made that even worse. I actually remember we did a bit of research in CGI where we saw that actually, and this was spoken about on the news as well, but the number of domestic violence or domestic abuse scenarios sort of skyrocketed during this period. And in CGI, what we did was we started a campaign to raise money for charities that are working with these women. So we raised some money for Refuge, which is a charity that supports women and children, to support them by offering a 24/7 helpline, and also ensuring that victims are contacted and they have some form of safeguarding. Domestic violence doesn't only just affect women, it affects men as well. So again, part of those activities is to ensure that we are supporting everybody throughout that process. At CGI, we refer to our employees as members, and we have an assistance program for our members where it's designed to support them with any issues that might affect them with their work, any family related issues or health related issues. And it gives an opportunity for members to speak on an anonymized helpline, to get some relevant counseling, some education information, or even referrals from qualified professionals to guide them on who they need to speak to and when. And again, we sort of use that platform to encourage people, because I think with something like domestic violence, it's quite a personal thing, and it's not something that a lot of people are forthcoming with. So by creating a safe space and an environment for that, it permits that. And also with our women's network, we have representatives that are there to sort of support and create an environment where we have conversations about these things.
That's great. Thank you, Caroline. I just wondered whether any of the other panelists wanted to come in on this, given the statistic means that all of us will have women in our workforce that will have experience of domestic abuse, what your organisations are doing or could be doing, and what good practice you've seen. So indicate if you want to come in.
Well, I'll just chip in, Cerys, very quickly and say, for someone like me who leads an organisation which is predominantly male orientated, disappointingly, albeit we're trying to change that as fast as we can, it would be really easy for us to just assume that we don't have that problem in our company, because we probably only employ perhaps 10%, if that, female members of staff. But that's quite stark, isn't it? So if we have perhaps 20 women working for us and 1 in 3 is affected, then suddenly we have got something to think about. So I think for anyone else who's particularly male dominated or a workplace, don't assume therefore that it doesn't apply to you. Certainly I find 1 in 3 really surprising, Caroline.
And I know because Louise used to work for Chwarae Teg, and we've presented on this topic together before, that I'm sure she would say that, as you've all talked about the practical tools that we can put in place in our organisations, Llamai and many others provide some of that training that we can put in place to support our workforce to be able to do exactly the sorts of things that Caroline was talking about, and have the confidence to be able to create safe spaces, and for line managers particularly to ask the questions and be able to support staff in the way that we hope that they would. I'm going to come to Keela next, and I guess it builds on something you were talking about, Keela. You said that your next mission is around disability, and we've had a question from Angela Painter from Apollo Teaching, and she asked, what are your thoughts on promoting disabled people within the workplace, and do you have disabled workers? I'm an ambassador for promoting fair play and equality in the workplace. I would be interested in hearing others' views on hiring disabled workers and the benefits that they can bring. So Keela, can I come to you first, but I'm going to come to other panel members.
Sure, absolutely. Do you know what, it's really well timed as well, because I'm actually taking a paper to our executive team next week all around disability inclusion. So to answer your question, because you mentioned, do you have disabled workers? Yes, we do have disabled workers in Food Standards Agency, and we do have disability confident accreditation, and we've got, as I say, I'm working on disability allies now as well. We're working on a program of disability role modeling too, a big focus on non-visible disability and neurodiversity, as well as training, recruitment, regarding timing. Certainly we had a lot of feedback on fatigue and pain and the timing of some of our recruitment and interviews, extra time for people who are dyslexic. And I must admit, I went to an autism training a few months ago, which was absolutely phenomenal. So I really, really want to get into more of neurodiversity space in the future too. So yeah, it's we've done a lot for definitely so far, but there's so much more scope of things to do. So yeah, I really want to look at allies, role modeling, training, and non-visible disability. That's my focus going forward.
Right, and Keane, because you said you've worked in and around civil service for a long time, perhaps I can ask you what changes, positive or negative, you've seen over that time in terms of disabled people's access to work and the types of roles that they're able to do, and what that adds to an organisation, because I guess you've seen the changes come.
Yeah, exactly. So much more visible, so much. And disability, so you know, the dream is to have inclusion threaded all the way through an organisation, in absolutely every space, whether it's recruitment, whether it's talent. I would say the biggest change I've seen is probably on talent. In really, really focusing on disability talent. So in the civil service, we do have our leadership program. Part of that is a disabled employees leadership scheme as well. So I'd probably say the biggest change I've seen is probably on disability, and we've got a whole program that focuses on disability for the civil service, and probably on talent is the biggest change I have seen, definitely for the better. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And Kushbi, I wanted just to put you on the spot again, but we've seen it. I was going to come to Kushbi actually, just to say over the last year, we've seen a huge shift to more remote and flexible working because of COVID.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think will enable greater diversity in the workplace? And what are you doing at Metro Bank to try and kind of capture that opportunity and harness it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think the last 12 to 18 months has really brought forward people as individuals. So you've got, prior you might have, this is my work me and this is my home me. And especially if you've got, commitments or children or anything else in the background, you might not feel comfortable bringing that to work. Whilst actually the last 12 months has forced that. I can't recall the amount of calls that we've been on where, children pop up or pets pop up or, deliveries come to the door. And you think that flexible working actually has worked. There's been so many fears around it in the past, a lot around the trust and, what do I do as a leader if I lose control or if I can't see what my people are doing? Well, actually being forced into it, nothing's fallen apart. We've had to all make adjustments, but it's worked. And I think that it's really helpful and really supportive for an individual, and going beyond diversity and inclusion for well-being, that whole topic, it just brings forth far more opportunities. At Metro Bank, we've got a far more flexible approach to working, and it's within our culture anyway. And I think, it's slightly difficult for store colleagues because we have to keep our stores operational. But our back office staff, we've got masses of flexibility now in terms of working from home. And it actually, going back to what I said earlier about business decisions, you look at costs, you look at, these big buildings that people have, and there's far more to it than just the benefit of your staff, which should be at the forefront anyway. But if you need any other excuse, look at all the other stuff that it brings forth for a business. And Metro Bank has certainly recognised that and moved forward with that.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, and that's something that we're definitely seeing with clients from Chwarae Teg, that perhaps, over the last 20 years when we've been talking about flexible and agile working and remote working or dispersed workers, they've felt nervous about it, and increasingly they've gone from saying, well, this would never work for our business, to, well, we had to do it because of COVID, and we could suddenly see some of those benefits that are really striking. I think the challenge for us all is going to be over the next year how we keep the good stuff that we've learned, and there is some really good practice out there, but also there are some negative behaviours, aren't there, in terms of people feeling perhaps isolated or not included. So it's going to be a really interesting transition. Caroline and Adam, if there's anything you want to come in on in terms of how COVID has changed the workplace and what impact that has on diversity and inclusion, please do.
Well, I was going to say two things actually, because I wear two hats, don't I? So as a public transport operator, I absolutely want everyone to come back to work in the office because they travel on my buses to get there. And so having people in the city is quite helpful. And we've seen a massive shift in the traditional peak. So normally we'd have every bus full between 7 and 9 in the morning and 3 and 5 in the afternoon. And that's not really the case anymore. The peaks have shifted because people are working different hours, which actually is quite helpful for us because we have more seats available than we didn't before. But wearing my employer hat, which is what I'm here for today, I think it really depends on the sort of people who you are talking about. So if you're perhaps running a great big sprawling call center full of people who are doing their first ever job working for you, and they don't understand about work etiquette, and they don't understand about booking on at the right time and finishing work when they should do, as opposed to 2 hours early, that might be really difficult for you to police as an employer. And how will you know if people are really doing what they should do? And I get that. But if actually you're talking about managers, administrators, and people who you really ought to have some faith in if you employ them to look after your company and do roles which involve trust, then I think it's absolutely right to be flexible with them. And just like Khushbu was saying earlier, no one has let us down. We've had people working from home from 1 day a week to 5 days a week, and no one has dropped off the radar and dropped the ball and left stuff unfinished. Everyone's pressed on. And in fact, what's happened by accident really is that people haven't worked 9 till 5, but they might have done 7 till 10, had a break to take the kids out, worked 2 till 4, and then perhaps logged on again at 7 in the evening to finish off something they didn't finish before 5. And we're fine with that because we don't need you to be at a desk between 9 and 5. So I think we've been really flexible. Have some trust in people if you can. And if it's managers and you don't trust them, then perhaps you need to rethink whether they're really doing the right kind of thing. But it's worked really well for us, and we've been told that people have stayed with us as an employer in admin roles because we've been that flexible.
That's a really powerful example, and I think it kind of builds on what Caroline was saying earlier, which is, empowering staff is absolutely key, and to empower them, you've got to trust them, and also that they have to trust the leadership of the organisation, that they mean it when they say that people can have that flexibility and still be valued and progress within the organisation. Caroline, was there anything you wanted to add?
I was going to say I absolutely agree with the points that have been raised today in terms of just embracing the new way of working rather than trying to oppose it, and actually trying to derive value from that. We've actually seen from a diversity and inclusion perspective, we've reaped the benefits. We've been able to have much deeper and important conversations. I mean, last year we managed to sort of have a conversation around race, a really candid conversation about what's the experience of our Black employees, of our Black members within the organization, and what that means for them professionally and how it affects them, particularly with what was happening with the statistics around COVID, the Black Lives Matter protests that were taking place previously. And then obviously for us as well with the Women's Network, where we're such a massive organization, it was always quite difficult to arrange events and try to get the women together under one building and do stuff. And this new virtual working has enabled us to have consistently have some form of engagement where we can communicate with women, have external speakers coming in, have people from other parts of the world get involved with what we're doing, which is really good for us as a business. There's been a lot of collaboration opportunities, and we've been able to provide support to our clients as well as we've been doing the work that we need to do during this challenging season. I'll be honest, I was one of the people that were eagerly waiting for everyone to be told go back into the office, but I'm slowly starting to embrace that actually we're probably never going to go back into that structure where you're in the office 5 days a week or however often you need to be in the office. And it's really about now having that empowered experience and bringing your whole self to work, and really actually bringing your whole self to work, not having a version of yourself that you bring and a version of yourself that you don't. So it's been really positive.
I think you're so right on that last point as well. Bringing your whole self to work is something we've talked about for a long time, but whether we really mean it and what we need to do to empower people to know that that's actually okay. And I guess the sort of examples that Adam gave around, you know, trusting people that it doesn't have to be 9 to 5, it can be 7 till 10, and then picking stuff up later and working that around people's lives. Because I used to work for an organisation with the chief exec always used to say, we have to remember that adults and people have spiky profiles, which he just meant that we've all got different things going on at different times. Keela, I know you want to come in on this as well.
Sure, yeah, and this might be a little bit controversial, but do you know what I've really been reflecting on? And this isn't about an organisation I'm in or have been in before, but regarding all of the conversation about flexible working, this conversation I've been hearing from disabled colleagues for a long time, and I'm really reflecting on why were voices not heard. So regarding flexible work here and it being amazing for inclusion has been talked about before regarding disability. And I'm like, why weren't those voices heard? So a little bit controversial, but I'm really reflecting on that as to why is it we're so focused on it in now, and why have we not listened before? And actually picks up on one of the questions in the QA that I've seen about listening to voices and actually really taking on board some of that. I know certainly in the civil service, all organisations are looking at taking the best of the best of this current types of working and going forward, because it is so much more inclusive. I went to a meeting, and this is a parish meeting, it wasn't in work, the other day, where you know you had that hybrid where you got some people in the room and some people who were on Zoom, and I couldn't hear a thing, and all I kept thinking was, do you know what? Captions will not pick up this meeting. We're going backwards, you know, into these not inclusive meetings again. I'm like, we've gone so much forward regarding inclusion, certainly around disability, and listening to how people feel about this way of working. And I just don't want to go back again.
Thanks, Keela. You're so right. I think there's something that's a takeaway perhaps for all of us to reflect on why have we not listened before, and what needs to change for us to really open our eyes to a different way of working. Adam, I know something that you could perhaps come in on in terms of, if we really want to see the changes that we're all starting to talk about, how do we address the fact that people are often well-intentioned but afraid of getting things wrong, or just a little scared to talk about these issues, not wanting to offend anybody or put their foot in it? Is there anything you can say about that?
I was going to just very briefly mention, and I should point out first of all that I'm not on a retainer for an HR company. So if I talk about getting good advice, it's just based on my experience. But the potential to put your foot in it and say the wrong thing is real. And even if you come on a session like this, that what's on your mind at all times, if I'm honest, is I've got to make sure I don't use the wrong word or say something that's going to offend someone. And the reality is you have to do two things. I think you have to get really good advice. So we've got a cracking HR person we work with who gives us good advice about current legislation, but also about you know, definitions and the appropriate language to use, so you are genuinely up to speed and well informed. But also just the need to have difficult conversations with people, and preferably in smaller groups where you can perhaps apologize if you say the wrong thing, but also ask them how you'd like them to be referred to. It is so important. I think we have groups of employees set up that we can communicate with, so that we can get the most out of them. And sometimes we do say the wrong thing, and we have to put our hands up and say, that was a real clanger, apologies, you know, how should we deal with that going forwards? But get good advice and have the difficult conversations. It's really tough, particularly if you haven't done it before, but people genuinely appreciate the fact that you're trying, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Adam. And I wanted to move us on slightly. We've had some questions both in advance and in the Q&A. So Alistair Wilson from Orchard Media submitted a question in advance, and you've kind of built on that question, Alistair, in talking about how we encourage and promote diversity within a business, but particularly focused on entry level, what we can do around ensuring that our recruitment is appealing to a much more diverse group, and that those people are actually coming successfully through those processes. And I guess linked to that, we've had a further question about how we position our brands and organisations so that the organisation looks accessible and attractive and like somewhere that is an inclusive environment. And I wondered, I'm going to pick on Cushbu because Metro Bank, quite a new or relatively new operator in a very established finance and professional services industry. What have you done both in terms of recruitment but brand positioning as well to ensure that you stand out from your competitors?
Sure, I think one thing we do at Metro Bank when we undertake recruitment, we always have a paragraph at the bottom of all of our role advertisements. And I haven't got the wording in front of me, so I can't read it out to you, but it talks not just about, you know, a quick we welcome applications from everyone, but it really goes into, I think, encouraging language to support people if they don't think they're quite there from a diverse background, if there's anything that they're not sure of, to come forth. I said earlier it's about leaders to make that environment, to make it welcoming. Well, it's for everybody to make it welcoming, and on that to really question yourself, because I think there's a lot around unconscious bias and understanding biases. I think most people would turn around to go, well, you know, I'm not racist, or I'm not sexist, or I'm not, you know, something, I'm not against diversity and inclusion, but you don't know what you don't know. And there are these tests that you can take to reveal what biases that you might have, because the interesting thing about this is that it's unconscious bias, so you're not conscious of it. So in terms of branding, in terms of recruitment, just double check with the groups that you are trying to encourage. Caroline, I think it was Caroline, mentioned earlier that, you know, we want to look like our clients. Well, ask these people that you want to look like, does this sound appealing to you? Don't just assume. We all know what assuming does for everybody. So don't just assume that you're being welcoming. Double check, you know, whether it's recruitment, whether it's branding, whether it's anything else. Are you pulling in all the diversity that you want? And that's not going to begin and end with your opinion, or it's not going to begin and end with opinions of people that are just like you. You've got to make the effort and the welcoming effort to make sure that it feels welcome to the people that you're trying to bring into your workforce.
Brilliant, thanks, Cushbu. I guess picking up on something you touched on there, coming to Caroline, Manisha has asked in the chat, what, and this I think builds on what you were talking about, Caroline, earlier, what can be done to help certain pockets of leadership in organisations to create an environment where all their staff can bring their whole selves to work and feel comfortable being authentic? And I think for me, the kind of eye-opener on that, just to say, over the last 5 years or so, is moving in recruitment practices to thinking not, does this person fit in with our culture, but which is just recruiting in our own image all the time, but what can we do to, or what can this person add to our culture that we, and how can we make sure that they feel included within it? So what can leaders do so that they create an environment where all their staff can bring their whole selves to work? Caroline?
I think that's a really good question. And there's several things leaders, I think, can do. The first thing is to be accessible, right? As a leader, if you're out there and people can't communicate and share ideas with you, even if it's something as simple as just a contribution and showing that you're engaged, that could really drive an impact. And I've sort of been witness to that in CGI. So one thing to sort of put out there is I joined CGI in 2018. I had a conversation with someone about what my interests were, not realizing I was actually speaking to someone quite senior. And they ended up giving me opportunities to be able to work on a particular project and something that I was quite passionate about. And it was quite nice seeing how such a big organization, having a conversation with someone can create opportunity. So I think, yes, the onus is on the leaders to be available and to recognize opportunities to help people. But I think it's also on the individuals. I think when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's about the individual that sort of sits within that marginalized group. What does good look like to you? And help to define that, help to educate on that in those areas. people are well-meaning generally in workplaces. No one's actively going to come and say horrible things or try to offend you. Actually, you find that a lot of the times when people say things that are a bit offside, they're trying to sort of make you feel included, but they don't use the right terminology. And it's really about taking the more sort of mature approach to it, which is, this is an opportunity to educate this person. However, if it keeps happening again, you realize the problem is not with the person not knowing, but it's actually just them being how they're behaving. And I think it's about leaders instilling that sense of ownership. Actually, it's okay for you to educate. It's okay for you to empower. It's okay for you to stand on this platform and teach us. I've seen a lot of benefits in reverse mentoring, where leaders speak to people that are part of those marginalized groups, whether it's young people, women, people of varying ethnic backgrounds, to talk about their experiences, and then actually listening and then seeing ways that they can implement that. So those are the suggestions I'll probably give.
Great, and I think just there's some really practical things that are about, you know, how can we really encourage people to bring their whole selves to work if we don't know anything about their whole selves. And too often in poor practices, organisations see individuals only as the role that they do and not as their whole person. Unless we take an interest in the whole person, then we can't really be inclusive. We've had, we touched on recruitment a little bit, but I wanted to come to perhaps Keela and Adam on this one. We had a question from Bill McAllister, who just asked the practical question: how can we recruit a diverse team? What new ways or different ways of recruitment can we try? So Keela, can I come to you first?
Sure. Sorry, I missed a little bit of that question. Did you say how best to recruit? Is that what you said?
Yeah, how can we recruit a diverse team? What sort of recruitment practices could we be using or trying? And I guess on that, I would say one of the things that I've learned is that I think we're always a bit afraid to experiment around recruitment. Yeah. And there's not always a perfect gold standard that works for every organisation. But let's hear from you.
Sure. Yeah. Can I use my own example? Because I was only recruited a couple of months ago into this job. And I was actually recruited by a staff engagement exercise. So I was expecting, right, this is what you do. You're doing an application and then you go and do an interview. And I had a bit of a shock when I was told that, no, the assessment is by staff engagement exercise. We want you to actually work with a group of people discussing this topic. It can get to an endpoint, and that's your assessment. And I was a bit like, oh, okay. But, you know, I know that interviews don't get the best out of everyone. And I'm like, great. So yeah, exactly. Experimenting with different types of recruitment for sure. And I would say, you know, I really do. Having done the staff engagement exercise, I would definitely recommend it. I really, really would. We've done other things as well. Obviously, we do have anonymous sifting. We've looked at our scoring of how we actually score within recruitment as well. We use diverse interview panels too. So when we do interviews, we've done a really big conscious effort on diverse panels. We've looked at our candidate packs. We've looked at the information we give during the process. We give additional time, as I said during my speech, about dyslexia as well. So we've tried a lot of initiatives. But what I would say is, actually, Cerys, what you just said, actually don't be afraid to experiment with some of these. In the civil service, we really do focus on evidence-based inclusion. So really keep up to date on what is the evidence base of some of these inclusive recruitment techniques, and give some of those a go, really. But I'm definitely a big supporter of staff engagement exercises for recruitment.
And we've got a couple of minutes left, and I really want to make sure that we come to a question that's been put in the Q&A. So Dee Llewellyn has, and I'm not sorry, Dee, I'm not sure what organisation you're from, but said, we provide pastoral care staff whose role is to provide support for any issues staff are going through. Do any of you provide anything similar in your businesses? And perhaps what benefit do you see from this? I think some of you have touched on staff networks, and in answer to the question about domestic abuse, we came close to this issue, but is any panelists want to address Dee's question? Otherwise, I'll pick on you.
I'll go for this, Cerys. So we have staff networks at Metro Bank, and through sort of electronic forms, through, well, in the last 12-18 months it's needed to be more virtual, but also we encourage our colleagues to speak to one another, and also encourage and foster an environment within leadership to have those sensitive conversations. So we make sure that our leaders and managers go through training to have sensitive conversations that are respectful, and how to build this environment that, you know, going back to what I said earlier, you don't need to have all the answers when you're having these conversations. You need to be empathetic more than anything when you're having these conversations, to understand what people are actually going through. So we do have that consciously at Metro Bank between our leaders and networks to really push forward. We've also got some great partners that we work with in terms of some of the next level conversations in terms of professional help. So should people need to take that that option as well. So we're very encouraging of speaking to people and having sensitive conversations, both having them yourself and being at the other end of listening to somebody.
That's great, thanks Khushbu. And I've got the unenviable task now, trying to sum up in some way, and I probably won't capture all of the salient points, but I just want to pick up on a couple of things that really stuck out to me. Adam talked right at the outset about not being afraid to challenge and making a comfortable environment where people feel that they can access the tools that they need to develop and to talk and behave and operate in different ways. And I think that's, you know, just a very simple, straightforward thing that we can all instill in our organisations. And Caroline, you were really powerful in talking about the importance of leadership and empowering staff to do it. So I guess building on not being afraid to challenge, but doing that from the top down. And I really liked what you're saying just towards the end about leaders needing to be accessible, and those practical tools around things like reverse mentoring, really, really helpful tips for us all to take. And Khushbu, right at the outset, you just gave a really powerful case for how diversity supports innovation and productivity, and challenged us all really. Why wouldn't we want to have that in our businesses and our workplaces? And I loved what your description of being inclusive. You talked about how that just is enabling everyone to have access to the mainstream, and you know, and also about being curious. And I guess that links to what Keela was saying towards the end there, about experimenting and being innovative and trying different things, because if we just keep doing the same things all the time, we'll get the same results. And Keela, I think what stood out from, and again, sounds like such a straightforward thing, but you said the vast majority of us are just limited by our own experience, and that's so right. And I always think that the first thing we can all do is check our privilege and recognise that our experience is only our experience, and that's different to the people around us. So we have to work hard, as you said, Keela, to address the gaps in our own understanding and experience, and that's what can really help us create much more inclusive workplaces for everybody. So the last thing, I guess, Keela, just to pick on the one thing that you said, which I hope we can leave in everybody's minds, is to ask ourselves, why haven't we listened before? And if anything that you've heard today has opened your eyes, then I'm sure you can get in touch with any of the panellists or the Chamber Wales, or indeed Chwarae Teg, for further support and help. And I just want to hope, on all of your behalf, thank the panel for their time and their expertise, and also the good work that they're all doing in their organisations to not just promote diversity and inclusion, but really create cultures that are welcoming and supportive, and enable everybody to benefit from all of the great things that we know we can from our working lives. So thank you to Chambers Wales, thank you to the panel, and for all of your time this morning, and hope to meet some of you again. Really great questions, and have a great week. Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone. Bye.